Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The entire city remains captivated for now a third day by the Signal Gate story, as it's being called, which has some new developments today after The Atlantic decided, after not publishing on Monday the specific details shared by the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in regard to planning strikes in Yemen, to do so today after repeated statements from the Trump administration and officials who were involved in this Signal chat that no classified information had been shared and no war plans were discussed. Enter the receipts, including screenshots of this Signal chat in which, for one example, Pete Hegseth says 13:45. Trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist at his known location should be on time. Also, strike drones launch MQ-9s. Those are Reaper drones. Joe, and this, of course, is after the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, had suggested in testimony yesterday that no targets were named, no times were given. This may beg to differ. And of course, the person who originated this Signal group chat is the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, who took to Fox last night to try to explain what happened here. I take responsibility. I built the group. Okay. So but look, that's the part that we have to figure out. And that's the part that embarrassing. Yes, we made a mistake. We're moving forward and we're going to continue to knock it out of the park for this president. Look at what he's gotten done in under 2 months.
We're moving forward, except that was before The Atlantic came forth with what Kailey just described to us, the actual texts from those who were in the chat, including the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Laura Davison is with us now, Bloomberg politics editor at the table, having spent the better part of 24 hours reporting on all of this. Laura, it's great to see you. In the hearing in the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday, was followed up on the House side today. Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director Ratcliffe were asked, did this conversation include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing? They both said no. Do we now believe that the answer is yes?
The receipts certainly show that. And they were asked yesterday, did this include any classified information? They denied there was any classified information in this exchange that was happening. And that's when you saw the Atlantic, which initially said, no, we're not going to publish. The back and forth here said, okay, we're going to go out and put this forward and let the people decide for themselves, where this information, kind of the sensitivities around this information. Gabbard today is back on the Hill testifying in front of the House. Really inconvenient timing for her. But she is now pointing to, oh, well, look, Hegseth was there. He was sharing this information. He has the ability to classify and declassify information. So therefore, nothing wrong was done. That's her argument. It's the same argument that people may remember from a couple years ago when classified information was seized from Mar-a-Lago. People said, look, it's up to the president's discretion. Nothing to see here. That's not what you're hearing, though, from folks in the intelligence community and as well as from Democrats, of course.
Well, and all the while, President Trump, to this point, is standing by his team. No suggestion that he's looking for anyone to lose their job over this. He maintains that Mike Waltz, while he made a mistake, is a good man, reiterating that again this morning. And it does seem that maybe the administration is trying to shift the news cycle, if you will, with other announcements. As Bloomberg is reporting, it could be as early as today, Laura, that the president announces long-awaited auto tariffs, which he's been teasing for weeks, if not months.
Yes, this would be, sort of ahead of that April 2nd date of sort of the big reciprocal tariff day. Auto tariffs is one he's been targeting specifically. The White House has not come out and confirmed whether this is happening, but this is one of the key ones. Trump, for a long time, has talked about wanting to make other countries' car companies, German car companies, wanting them to come to the U.S. So this is what he's targeting here. But this really has the auto industry worried because, especially across North America, these supply chains are very interconnected. Parts and cars cross the border between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. multiple times. Car dealers are warning that this could cause the prices of cars to go up by, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. So this really has markets down sharply after this story popped on the wire earlier today.
Well, I guess if there is news, we'll bring it to you here on Bloomberg. Hard to tell if that's actually going to happen today when it comes to tariffs. We do have an X date, though. Well, we have an X date window from the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, telling us it's going to be August, maybe September, when we hit the debt ceiling here. Of course, we are already under extraordinary measures here. The Treasury Department, we're talking about extraordinary measures probably exhausted in August or September of 2025. That's better than May, which some had feared. Does it help to add some urgency to this conversation?
It does, and I'll note that CBO said that if tax receipts don't come in as expected, whether that's because the economy takes a downturn and as a result of all this tariff business, or if the IRS has had a bunch of workers laid off,
right.
People are the IRS has warned that people could try to cheat on their taxes more. If tax receipts are down, CBO says that we could be in May facing a potential breach of the debt ceiling. So that's a lot of pressure on lawmakers who are talking about putting this in that bigger tax bill. So the House has sort of moved on this. The Senate is now negotiating. John Thune came out last night and said, yes, we think that we're forming some consensus around putting the debt ceiling in the tax bill. But they still have to negotiate everything that's in and out of that bill, and that's going to be a really tough negotiation. It's possible they get there by August, but if this is May, that's a totally different conversation.
Wow.
Yeah, we know Washington loves a deadline, but that deadline might be coming up pretty quick.
That's for sure.
To the point where it makes some people uncomfortable. Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, thank you so much for joining us. And to Laura's point, with the uncertainty around receipts, it points to the idea that this is also an inexact science. It's very hard to nail down an X date, which just speaks to the risk around it and the notion that you could accidentally stumble into default if you don't act quickly enough.
It's the cable guy window, of course, August to September, a little bit hard to pin down and hard to pick the day off that you're going to take here. But yeah, with regard to what's happening at the IRS, Laura put her finger on it. It's not just a question of receipts. It's a question of the agency's ability to process all of this information in the throes of Doge cuts.
Well, that's absolutely right. You need to have people to push the paperwork,
Yeah.
and that paperwork may get pushed a little bit slower if
true.
you don't have as many people doing it. So we want to get into all of this now with Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who used to direct the Congressional Budget Office that we've been speaking about. He's now president of the American Action Forum, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Douglas, always good to have you on Balance of Power. As the CBO says, August to September is the window they would guess for now, but there's a risk it is months earlier than that. What would you put the odds around the X date actually being sooner than late summer?
I think we're going to know pretty quickly. There are persistent rumors that receipts are coming in lower than expected. CBO included that cautionary note in their report. They didn't just say, look, it's going to be August or September. These dates, the key ones being, the April tax payments and then early June a tax payment. The cash flows that come from that can carry you for a while. But if those cash flows aren't big enough, the date jumps forward by months. And this is not something that we want to, treat cavalierly. A default by the United States would be a cataclysm for the international financial system. No one thinks that's a good idea. But they don't have a plan to raise the debt limit. I think the thing that's significant here is they're still talking about doing this in reconciliation. They haven't yet agreed on a joint budget resolution. They haven't passed that in the House and Senate. They don't yet have draft reconciliation legislation. We're a long way from voting yes or no on a reconciliation bill. And if that's going to carry the debt limit, I'm concerned about the timetable. You may want to think about doing that as a standalone and not risk the financial standing of the United States with this legislative initiative.
Well, there you go, Douglas. I heard August, September. I thought, hey, we got time. We can go to Vegas. There's all kinds of money to spend here. But you just walked us to the news. As usual, they can't get this done in reconciliation, which could take the rest of the year. So how should Congress handle it?
Right. I think they should right now be having a discussion with the Democrats in the House and the Senate to talk about passing in regular order a debt limit bill. They may want to combine it with, emergency supplementals for fires in California. There's some business Congress needs to do. Do that business, do it in a timely fashion, take off the table any risk to the economy, especially given the other things going on that comes with tiptoeing up to a debt default.
Well, okay, so if ultimately we're talking about tiptoeing here, when they're talking about an accelerated timeline that they want to get this done, who are you going to be watching? Is this ultimately a Senate issue, Douglas? Is this the House issue? Because they're talking about coming more into alignment here, and yet we know even just within the individual conferences in each of those chambers, Republicans can sometimes have difficulty with one another.
So they really can't lose any votes in either the House or the Senate. In the Senate, they can lose a couple, but there's not really any room for error here. So there has to be a carefully pre-negotiated agreement on the numbers that are in the budget resolution, who's cutting what, who's creating deficits with tax cuts, who gets those responsibilities, and then how are they going to do that? Like, what are the pieces of the policy that are going to be in the tax piece, the energy policy, the border security? That's a lot of issues, and that's a lot of issues to come to agreement with in advance before you go off and take these votes. I view that as a very time-consuming process, and you don't get to watch just the Senate or the House because neither can dictate to the other because no one has any room to maneuver. So it's going to be, meet, come out, announce we made some progress. They will always announce they made progress. But until you have a bill introduced and you can see it and read it and vote on it, you're not done. And this is one of those situations where nothing's finished until it's all finished.
Isn't that right? And we haven't even gotten to the CBO scoring, which we discussed last time you were on, Douglas. I wonder if you're a Republican leader, if you're Speaker Johnson, if you're Senator John Thune at this moment, are you more worried about the CBO score that lands on a final reconciliation bill, or should you be more worried about the parliamentarian, the gatekeeper, about what can go in?
I think they're equal worries because they have these two big guardrails on the reconciliation progress. The first process, the first is what is in and out, what is germane and not germane, and in principle, reconciliation bills, all of the provisions are primarily budgetary in nature. That definition has been stretched over the years, and so what will the parliamentarian allow us to go in these bills, and what will they pull out? Will they, for example, be able to do regulatory reform and reconciliation? We'll see. And then the second big guardrail is you can't create new deficits past the 10-year budget window. That comes down to the scoring. What are you doing in the way of spending cuts? What are you doing in the way of tax provisions? That gets to the Joint Committee on Taxation and the CBO. They're both comparably important issues for the leaders. And so they're going to be checking with their members, checking with the scorers, checking with the parliamentarian, and just hoping they can check all three boxes and get to yes. And this is a very difficult endeavor for them.
Well, and we've heard some consternation from Republicans about the idea that the CBO also can't factor into scoring tariffs that are starting in the executive branch. And we just got some news on that, Douglas. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has begun her briefing and says that President Trump will be announcing auto tariffs at 4 p.m. this afternoon. He, of course, has been teasing that this could come in the coming days. We're expecting this could be about 25% on auto imports. And this is before, a week from today, Liberation Day on April 2nd. If the CBO could factor in tariff revenue that they're scoring, Douglas, do we even have enough clarity as to what exemptions will be, what the levels are, when all of this is going to impact, to even consider what kind of revenue source it could be for the United States Treasury?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, they can't because they score legislation and the tariffs aren't being legislated. Congress delegated this authority to the executive branch, and so the president's often doing it. So they can't be in there. If they were, you would have to write down the tariff schedule. You'd have to write down the date of it becomes enforced, the rate at which is applied, what it is applied to, all the exemptions that would be there. So we'd have a lot more clarity if it was done legislatively and if originated in the Ways and Means Committee the way revenue measures are supposed to. We don't have any of that clarity. And you've been watching this story. Why do you think the auto tariffs are being announced today? Let's stop talking about Signal.
Wonder if it's
let's
a
talk
news
about
cycle
something
pivot.
else. That is the only thing. That is all this is.
It's almost like you've been around
good
Washington
for their
a minute.
messaging. Maybe. It might be good for their messaging. That's bad for the economy. We've seen this before. It's on again, off again, uncertainty about the nature of the tariff burden. So this is a bad news day for the economics profession and the outlook for the economy, but it's a good news day if they can change the subject, and that's where we are.
Well, great to have you back. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, as always, used to run the Congressional Budget Office, president of the American Action Forum, with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. He's suggesting the tail is wagging the dog today.
Yeah, the timing certainly is something. This was not originally on the White House schedule that was sent out in terms of guidance. This is a new addition, 4 p.m. Eastern time. The president is expected to announce auto tariffs 1 week before he's expected to announce reciprocal tariffs.
That's correct. Liberation Day, as you put it.
Yes.
So we have a little program
As
at
he
5
puts it.
o'clock.
I'm quoting.
Quoting him. 5 p.m. Eastern Time. That's why you need two balances of power. We'll have much more on the news conference coming up a little bit later on. We'll assemble our signature panel next for their take right here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
And we've just learned that roughly 2.5 hours from now, we add another item to the White House agenda. President Trump at 4 p.m. is set to announce tariffs on auto imports. Now, he's long said these were coming. He actually said earlier this week he could be making this announcement in the coming days, but we've learned that today is going to be that day, Joe. It is an interesting case of timing here, as the day to this point, by and large, has been dominated by the Signal group chat story.
Signal group chat story that takes on new meaning after the Atlantic went ahead and published some of the attack plans that were texted by the Defense Secretary, the reaction that we saw from Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, as well as Vice President J.D. Vance. It's a little different when you can actually read this, having heard that these were not classified and that some of these directives were not shared. Apparently, they were. And so we knew we were in for a doozy of a press briefing at the White House. And sure enough, as Kailey mentioned, Caroline Leavitt began by announcing a news conference on auto tariffs. And that's where we start with our signature panel. Back with us today in hour 2 of Balance of Power, Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, and partner at Stone Court Capital, is with us alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, of course, political science professor at Iona University. This moves now to more of a communication story, at least with regard to our conversation. Rick Davis, what do you make of this idea, throwing down an auto tariffs news conference in the middle of the day like this? Good politics, good communication strategy?
Yeah, look, I mean, Donald Trump was sort of teasing this out for a while, that he was going to be doing something on autos separate from the April 2nd Independence Day reciprocal tariff announcement. And it makes sense that if it's not a reciprocal tariff, why not take it out and do it separately for impact? Obviously, today, you don't have to sit through too many communications meetings at the White House to realize, what are we going to talk about today to change the topic away from Signal? And so it makes sense that this is going to be the case. And the question is, what does that do to markets? How is that going to be accepted? I mean, part of the narrative that's building around the economic policies of this administration, specifically to tariffs, is that you never really know what's going to happen day to day. It's not well rolled out. There's no expectation within the affected parties. Are they preliminary communications about how big these tariffs are going to be and what they're going to apply to? And so here we have another, today we're going to have a tariff announcement, and it's easy to see why there's so much tumult in the markets, because every given day could be some major impact on global markets or domestic markets.
Well, and they're left questioning whether or not this is real or another head fake, Jeannie, given that we've seen full-on tariff announcements before that then get pulled back or extended, delayed. Just because he's announcing this today and maybe announces an implementation today doesn't actually necessarily, at least historically over the last few months, mean these tariffs will go into effect on the initial date announced, right?
That's right. And as you mentioned, the last 8 weeks, it's been a lot of back and forth fakes pulling back. So we have to wait and see. They're already talking about some exemptions. But Kailey, I am coining a new phrase. We talk about diversionary foreign policy when we use military action to distract from domestic scandal. Now here we have diversionary tariffs, the use of economic tariffs to distract from domestic scandal. So that is my contribution to the lexicon. And I do think that helps explain what is going on here. And I agree with Douglas Holtz-Eakin on that. But the reality is it is a questionable communication strategy, because you should divert with something that is going to rally people together. And the imposition of 25% tariffs at some point on autos is hardly that thing. So I think the White House is starting to lose grip a little bit. I'm not sure how this helps distract in a meaningful or useful way, if that's what they're going for.
How does this actually change the story today, Rick, this update that we got from The Atlantic, actually reading the texts, or does it? I mean, there were some questions yesterday about whether this information was sent at all. Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director Ratcliffe, suggested it was not. Is it different to actually see it in publication, or are we questioning the source on this still?
Yeah, I think the way I read the hearing yesterday, which was very important. I mean, here you had a prearranged schedule to talk to the heads of the Trump administration's intelligence committee firms, and by the very sober and serious Senate Intelligence Committee. Mm-hmm. And I saw a lot of hesitation and sort of coming clean. I mean, the point that was made by Tulsi Gabbard was that I didn't see or I didn't send any classified information, right? It wasn't that there wasn't any in there.
Yeah.
And obviously what's happened since then is everyone's basically locking arms. The one consistent thing is they're claiming none of this was considered confidential. So you're in an administration where the president himself was indicted over the mishandling of classified information, and you've had a hearing that was, I would say, arguably a horrible hearing, when it came to what the administration looked like they were doing vis-a-vis the care of our nation's secrets. And it's just a really rough start. And it's just stunning to me that, like, this is month 2 of this administration, and we've got, almost 4 years left, and we already are seeing all kinds of major swings in the economy, in the domestic politics, in our national security positions.
Well, let's get a taste of what Rick just described as a horrible hearing. This was an exchange between Gabbard and Ratcliffe and the Democratic senator from New Mexico, Martin Heinrich.
Did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Director Gabbard, same question.
Same answer, and defer to the Department of Defense on that question.
Well, those are two different answers, but you're saying that was not part of the conversation.
That's my knowledge.
The precise operational issues were not part of this conversation.
Correct.
Okay.
So the deference to the Department of Defense, Jeannie, could that be read as finger pointing at Pete Hegseth, who actually sent the message with the details, or finger pointing at Mike Waltz, who created the group chat in the first place? Are those the two individuals, if President Trump were to change his mind and decide he does want someone to take the fall for it, that would have to take that fall?
Most likely. And, it is just fascinating because you heard both Tulsi Gabbard and Ratcliffe say, we know nothing about it. Go talk to Pete Hegseth. I'm waiting for Pete Hegseth to say I'm going to declassify, because he does have that power. But the reality here is that even today in the House hearing, when Tulsi Gabbard was asked by Jimmy Gomez if Pete Hegseth was drinking when he wrote these, she didn't say no. She said, I don't know. Director Ratcliffe at least came back and said, oh, that's an outrageous question, right? So it is getting ugly in the administration. And I think from a policy perspective, something to keep in mind is that these two who are on the hot seat, Hegseth and Mike Waltz, these are the most conventionally hawkish of the people in the administration. And there is some talk out there that the isolationists, the Tucker Carlson wing, if you will, who J.D. Vance apparently is representing now, they would like nothing more than to oust a Waltz and or a Pete Hegseth in favor of somebody more isolationist. And we saw some of that in the back and forth as well. So there are enormous implications here on both sides. But it is getting ugly, and they are pointing fingers.
I want to get into that with Rick for a moment. Do you buy that line that we're seeing in reporting today, that because Mike Waltz is some sort of traditionalist defense hawk, that he could get blown out by MAGA?
Well, there are always those kinds of things, no matter what is happening. The push and shove ideologically and politically in this town is constant, right? There's never a day where you are safe to wander the halls of Congress or the White House that somebody isn't shooting at you.
Wow.
And so that shouldn't surprise anybody. It is a blood sport in Washington. And there's a lot at stake, right? I mean, as Jeannie mentioned, there are ideological divides within MAGA, and they play out on a daily basis. That being said, there were a lot of people at risk here, including the vice president. And so the last thing that the vice president wants to do is draw more attention to a scandal that his name is associated with. And so, sure, there'll be opportunistic shots on goal, to use a Gretzky phrase. But at this point, I think it's all just damage control, right? The last thing this administration wants is turnover in 2 months. And that's why you see him holding on so hard to keep everybody sort of on message and together on this, because the last thing that this administration wants is turnover within the first 60 days.
But would you say they're all together on the same message, Jeannie? Because arguably, Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe gave some different answers yesterday in the Senate intelligence hearing. You had Mike Waltz on Fox last night suggesting that it was not a staffer of his that actually was adding numbers to the group chat, when President Trump has suggested that it was an aide, not the principal himself. Do you see a cohesive message here?
Not at all. I mean, I was watching that too, Kailey, last night. It was like they were all syncing from different playbooks. And, you know, that is a sign that they are either at odds or in disarray at the very best, probably. And it's stunning because to this point, one thing that we have been told is Trump 2.0. They are moving together, growing forward, if you will, and, you know, a fine-tuned machine. And here we go. The gloves have come off, and we are seeing that they are not standing together, and they're not even singing from the same playbook. And so I think the president today at 4 is going to try to move this towards another conversation, because Donald Trump is great at communication, and he knows that this is a loser for him and the administration.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature political panel here with us on Balance of Power.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
Here in the void in Washington, if you're with us on YouTube. If you're not, search Bloomberg Business News Live. Also, of course, always on the radio. Bloomberg Radio and Satellite Radio Channel 121. This is feeling kind of familiar. You listen to Charlie. He tells you that stocks are lower. You look at the terminal. You see the headline. NASDAQ down 1.5% as tariff angst roils stocks. Then you look at the next headline. Trump repairs auto tariff announcement as soon as Wednesday. Well, here we are again. This is a familiar place. And as we watch the markets try to get legs back after the brutal reversal that we saw, taking us all the way back before the election, we haven't even reached Liberation Day yet. The lovely Kailey Leinz reminded me this morning when I got to work that we're a week out from Liberation Day. Yeah, April 2nd, right? Reciprocal tariffs. But what about the auto tariffs? Now we understand those could be coming as soon as today or not. President actually talked about the tariff situation specific to reciprocal, as he calls it, in an interview on Newsmax. This idea that there could be lots of exceptions. He said so yesterday at the White House. Maybe not so much. Here's the president.
Not too many. Not too many exceptions. No, I don't want to have too many exceptions. Yeah. We're just going to be reciprocal. In fact, I'll probably be more lenient than reciprocal, because if I was reciprocal, that would be very tough for people.
As we cover the intersection of Washington and Wall Street, it's a great pleasure to bring in Barry Ritholtz, the sage, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, and of course, host of Bloomberg Radio's Masters in Business. He's got a new book out as well. We're getting him on the book tour. How not to invest, the ideas, numbers, behaviors that destroy wealth, and how to avoid them, which I think we could all use right about now. Barry, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Balance of Power. I'm not sure I know where to start with you, other than to ask if we're really building a bottom here. Is Wall Street getting numb to this, or this is just the go forward? Donald Trump is the market.
Yeah, well, go back to 2016. If you remember, in Trump 1.0 or 45, however you want to call that election. He was tweeting back when X was called Twitter at specific companies, at specific CEOs. Remember Tim Apple, and General Motors. And, the first couple of weeks when that happened, the first few months, every time he would pick a company and tweet at them, the stock would wobble. There'd be all sorts of, people running around with their hair on fire, analysts downgrade. And then it took a couple of months before people realized, oh, this is just the new operating procedure. This is the environment we're in. And the ability to move markets kind of lost its power. Eventually, if you just have noise blaring in the background, eventually it just becomes background noise. Yeah, and so maybe this is a little bit of wishful thinking on my part, but it very much feels like that's what's going on now. Hey, we're barely 2 months into this administration, and we began with Wall Street celebrating, hey, new administration, we're going to get tax cuts, we're going to get deregulation, business-friendly environment, look for more M&A and more buybacks. And that narrative dominated for a few months, from election to pretty much till January 20th. And then the crazy thing is, none of this is a surprise. This is what Donald Trump, candidate, told us he would do as Donald Trump president.
That's right.
Hey, I'm going to put in some tariffs. Brace yourself. And so now he's doing what he said he's doing, and people seem to be kind of shocked. Maybe it's the sort of chaotic nature, and it just feels like everything is random and spitballing. The signal snafu and the sort of, I don't think we could call that group the best and the brightest. I think that's making people a little nervous, and you're starting to see CEOs say, let's just slow our roll with some CapEx till we have a little clarity, because this chaos, I hate the word uncertainty, this chaos is not encouraging us to spend tens of millions of dollars on new projects.
So was it just a matter of getting past Liberation Day, the announcement of reciprocal tariffs next week? Or is this a market that's basing right now, and all of a sudden chaos or uncertainty lifts after that date, or it's going to take a while for us to get to know this new version of Donald Trump?
I don't know. I'm a little hesitant to say that the market is basing here, although I will tell you, I started on a trading desk 30 years ago. 10% pullbacks from all-time highs happen. Go back to 1950. We've had about 53 examples of it. So over that 75 years, what is that, like once every 18 months or so? Not that it's clockwork, but, 2 out of every 3 years, you're going to get a 10% pullback. I cannot recall more angst and wailing and pulling of the hair out of the head for 10% off the highs. Are you kidding me? Do you not remember down 57% in the financial crisis? Like, you have to learn to accept volatility as the cost of admission for long-term gains.
So maybe this was due anyway, but if you look at an S&P chart, it's broken still, right? We're below the 50, we're below the 200. At what point do you start buying into weakness here so you look like the smart guy when all of this short-term pain supposedly pays off in the second half?
So the data tells us never just pick a point. You want to, if you are buying on weakness, if you have cash you're lying around, first the data says put it all in at once. 2 out of 3 days on a rolling basis, you're better off doing that than scaling in. However, the psychology of how humans behave around risk, around volatility, around market pullbacks, down 10%, pretty ordinary. If you have a little extra cash, okay, you could roll it into equities. I don't really get excited till down 20, 25%. And down 30%, I'm flipping over couch cushions and looking for loose change, anything I could do down 30%, because that's really a pretty rare event. Q1 2020, down 34%. You got to go back to the GFC before that, and then the dot-com implosion, and then you really have to go back to 87 before you see that again. So that's a much more infrequent event. And the data says, all right, down 10%. So what? About half the time, the pullback stops there, and half the time it keeps going. down 10 to 20%. So it's really a coin flip here. I know no one likes that answer, but that's the math.
Well, you're honest. Yeah. Look, I associate Riddle's wealth management with, as you put it, getting rich slowly, building wealth slowly. And people who come to you know this. That's why they come to find you. But what's it been like lately? What are the questions? What's the sense of urgency that you're getting from clients over all of this? And are you telling them just to hang on?
So we do quarterly calls for clients, and in the January 2025 quarterly call, having nothing whatsoever to do with President Trump or tariffs or anything else, we said, hey, back-to-back plus 25% years. That is so rare that when we went back in history and looked at the data, we had to use back-to-back 20% years because you really don't see a lot of 25 plus 25 in a row. And the range that you end up with following that, it could be anywhere from minus 10% to plus 10%. But the takeaway was don't expect double-digit gains in a year that follows 2 years like 23 and 24. Lower your return expectations for equities. Look for a modest year this year. And pretty much so far, and that's not a forecast. That's just here's what's happened historically. Given how rare this is and the relatively small data set, it's not conclusive, but seems pretty reasonable to say we don't get a lot of plus 25s 3 times in a row. Let's just lower expectations. That seems to have been pretty good advice heading into 25.
Wow, this is great. I don't know what we're going to get charged for this, but this is a great session with Barry Riddle. So we've got a couple of minutes left, Barry. What's the action item that worries you the most? Is it lawmakers having to deal with the debt ceiling at the same time as Trump tax cuts, or is it the unknown about tariffs?
So I really don't care about the debt ceiling. I don't care about deficits. Ever since I was yay hauled to a grasshopper, all I've heard, literally my whole adult life, is, hey, deficits are going to cause structural inflation. It'll crowd out Uncle Sam from borrowing. It'll crowd out private capital. It'll destroy the all the deficit.
Ray Dalio
warnings,
was sounding the alarm down here yesterday,
right.
as I'm sure you heard.
Can I tell you something? When somebody is wrong for half a century, right? If you're wrong every year for half a century, if the deficit hawks were running a fund, they would have been out of business a long time ago. Politics, you can be wrong forever, and you don't really seem to catch heat. In the market, the feedback loop is so quick and so efficient and so brutal that if you're that wrong for that long, no one pays attention to you. So I'm not all that concerned about deficits. What I am concerned about is 3 months ago, risk of a weakening dollar, risk of a recession, risk of a market crash, risk of increased volatility, geopolitics. They were all pretty low. They're not like flashing red yet, but they certainly have become elevated. Risk of recession is probably up from 10% to call it 30%. I don't know how you put a real number on that. Okay. We've obviously seen volatility spike. Questions about alternatives to the dollar are erupting. Listen, it's our exorbitant privilege that our currency is the world's reserve currency. I'm a little nervous that anyone would do anything to put that at risk. It seems to be a little bit of a self-inflicted, an own goal. You never want to accidentally kick the ball into your own goal. And so just the general lack of structure, organization, this sort of chaos presidency, we're starting to see this, not just the soft data make us a little concerned about a potential recession down the road. That can easily bleed into the hard data as we see CapEx spending fall off, as people take fewer vacations, as they throttle back their savings. That's a rising. It's still not a flashing red light, but it's worth paying attention to.
Fascinating deep dive with Barry Riddle. So I'd say he should get his own show, but he has one. It's called Masters in Business here on Bloomberg. Founder, Riddle's Wealth Management. Thanks for the wisdom, Barry. You're always welcome here. The book is How Not to Invest. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Pretty newsy day here In Washington, happens just like I said yesterday, high noon. There's something magic about this time. We meet every day. There's a breaker. And sure enough, today, Donald Trump preparing an auto tariff announcement, we learn, as soon as Wednesday. Wait, that's today. But we were talking about the whole Signal chat. So maybe this is an opportunity, we'll say, to change the subject, because everybody's talking about this. We got a new layer from the Atlantic. If you're just waking up to what's going on today, I suspect that we'll be hearing from Donald Trump at some point, the President of the United States. We did just hear from Michael Waltz, his national security advisor, who, of course, is knee-deep in this whole, won't call it a scandal, surrounding the Signal chat and the distribution, the texting of, don't call them war plans, attack plans? The Atlantic listened all day yesterday to White House officials, including Waltz himself, suggest that it was some sort of media hoax, interference. The Atlantic, a discredited magazine, as the president said, with a discredited journalist, an axe to grind. No one's paying attention to the real story. And we did hear conflicting versions of who might have been responsible for what, who invited Jeffrey Goldberg to this Signal chat. Michael Waltz spoke alongside the president, as you saw and heard in a cabinet meeting yesterday, and then was dispatched to try to clean this thing up on Fox News. It didn't get a lot cleaner, as we found in the conversation with Laura Ingraham. Listen.
I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So but look, that's the part that we have to figure out. And that's the part that embarrassing, yes. We made a mistake. We're moving forward, and we're going to continue to knock it out of the park for this president. Look at what he's gotten done in under 2 months.
But you never talked to him before, she said. So how was the number on your phone? Waltz said, well, if you have somebody else's contact, somehow it gets sucked in. It gets sucked in, unquote. We're learning a lot, I guess, about Signal here. I sent a Signal text over to Tony Capaccio at the Pentagon to see if he could come on today. Magically, he's back with me in studio. We had barely recovered from our conversation yesterday. It's great to see you. And I'm not joking around. This is some pretty serious stuff you brought to us. Now we've got the actual, should I call them attack plans? We're splitting hairs on the semantics here, right?
We're definitely splitting hairs, whether you have gray hair, brown hair, or no hair.
Okay, got it.
So, war plans, this is the equivalent. Let's say we're planning the bin Laden raid. The concept of operation, the war plan would be we're using SEAL Team 6, yep, 2 helicopters, and an overhead drone to monitor. Mm-hmm. The concept of operations, President, is XYZ. The tactical issues are what we're talking about here. In Air Force Navy lingo, it's called the Air Tasking Order.
Okay.
How you organize the minuet of Tomahawks and aircraft so they're deconflicted in the air. So this is the execution part. Mm-hmm. Splitting hairs, you could say in colloquial it's a war plan,
sure,
but it's really the attack plan, okay, or the air tasking order that they laid out. And I had a top former CENTCOM official tell me a little while ago that these are at the secret level.
They are.
And Jeffrey Goldberg made the point, this is 30 minutes before the attack commenced.
That's right.
So if the Houthis had some intelligence, high-level eavesdropping capability to pick up on signal, they could have been alerted.
These airmen could have been in big trouble.
But they don't. So
yeah, they don't. Okay. Well, so here we are. We're talking about Michael Waltz, but it was in fact Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who you cover every day, who texted at 11:44 a.m. Eastern Time, posted in the chat in all caps, "Team update." Text begins, "Time now. 11:44. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are a go for mission launch." It continues. 12:15. F-18s launch. First strike package. It continues at 13:45. Trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch. MQ-9s. What are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about MQ-9s picking up real-time imagery, beaming it back to the Truman Battle Group, mm-hmm, and maybe CENTCOM and some command and control nodes there, and actually, queuing the aircraft in. The Tomahawks they fired were called they're tactical Tomahawks. They're the lightest models. They can loiter and be retargeted.
Uh-huh.
So this is a real impressive minuet and the importance of the drone.
Yeah.
So one of the sources and methods that they disclosed in this, when Waltz says the first target, their top missile guy, we had positive ID of him walking into his girlfriend's building, and now that's collapsed. Well, that's the sources and methods. That's the MQ-9 actually seeing and beaming back.
Wow.
And commanding and linkages that are actually the taxpayers should be happy actually worked, if not maybe disclosed this way.
Well, an impressive minuet, I believe Tony Capaccio just said.
And it's not even a Twyla Twerp ballet.
We go on. VP building collapse. This is Waltz now. Had multiple positive ID. 6 minutes later, the vice president confused. Messaging what? Waltz responds. This is incredible stuff. Typing too fast. The first target, their top missile guy, we had positive ID of him walking into his girlfriend's building, and it's now collapsed, unquote. We had a hearing today, House Intelligence, second day, Tulsi Gabbard, CIA Director Ratcliffe, Kash Patel from the FBI. Democrat lawmakers show up with these texts printed out, big easels set up. It's hard to deny that we had sensitive information here. You heard from a former CENTCOM official say that
this was at
this
the
is classified.
Level. This was at the secret level. It would have been downgraded as the attack after the attack proceeded, but this was before. So I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to argue that this was not classified information, and it was a plan of attack versus a strategic war plan.
Yep. I want to go back to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Heinrich here from the Intel hearing, much like what we saw today on the House side. Martin Heinrich, a Democrat from New Mexico, talking to John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, Tulsi Gabbard, DNI. Let's listen from yesterday.
Did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Director Gabbard, same question.
Same answer, and defer to the Department of Defense on that question.
Well, those are two different answers, but you're saying that was not part of the conversation.
That's my knowledge.
The precise operational issues were not part of this conversation.
Correct.
Okay.
We isolated that, Tony, because again, the question, did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing? Clearly it did.
It surely did. And I listened to her today at the House when she was hit by one of the House Democrats. And it was the I don't recall argument.
Which Kash Patel actually said numerous times. You ever use Signal for, I don't recall. It works better in court,
I don't recall.
right?
That's a good Watergate hearings thing from 52 years ago.
So we're back to Pete Hegseth today. By the way, if you're with us on YouTube, I don't know. I think they found us. They got our backdrop. They must be listening in. What happens to the Secretary of Defense in a damage control moment like this, having said on the tarmac over the weekend that this didn't even happen?
Yeah, he's in Asia, and I think he's going to come out unscathed on this. But his press secretary sent out this note a little while ago. It's no surprise hoax peddlers at the Atlantic have already abandoned their war plans claim. These additional signal chat messages confirmed there was no classified materials or war plans shared.
Okay.
So I don't want to read the whole thing, but that's their response, which is not totally accurate.
We're out of time. We've got 30 seconds left. Does the White House press office take it from here, or is the Pentagon press office at full speed as well?
No, the Pentagon press office is not at full speed. This is an attack dog, a coordinated attack dog approach from the White House press office in terms of responding.
Fascinating, as always. It's great to have you back. You can just come every day if you want. We're going to be talking about this for a while, I think.
You would burn me out,
You do have
Joe.
a real job, right?
I
would burn you out. We'll see about that. Tony Capaccio, the best in the business at the Pentagon, reporting for Bloomberg. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, where the sun is out. Don't be fooled on YouTube. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.